PR's Top Pros Talk, the evolution of pharmaceutical companies, featuring Stacey Bernstein, CEO of M Booth Health. And here's your host, Doug Simon.
Americans' attitudes about health are so important to actually communicating about health to the public. Stacey, can you tell us a bit about the survey you conducted?
Sure. So it's called the Pharma Brandemic. We did the first wave of it in early 2021, where we had a hypothesis that is probably not surprising, but that there must be a heightened and increased awareness of the pharmaceutical industry following COVID-19. And of course, we saw that. We fielded the next version of the survey this year because what we wanted to see was, did that awareness and empowerment have staying power? Has it really, as COVID changes and our awareness and engagement with that changes, has that also continued to truly change the way that people manage their health decisions?
Yeah, and what were some of the top findings that maybe surprised you or didn't surprise you?
I mean, there's so many. The reality is, yes, it had staying power. Patients are even more aware of pharmaceutical companies, aware of the differences between treatments. They're far more engaged in their health than ever before. And some of the inklings of data that we saw in 2021 really increased, one of which that I find fascinating is that more than half of Americans now see pharmaceutical companies as lifestyle brands, akin to, Nike and Apple. And that was incredibly surprising, just that shift of how you see an industry evolve throughout your experience with the global pandemic.
With the idea that people think of a pharmaceutical company as a lifestyle brand, how does that inform your communications? Is that a good thing for an organization? It's a bad thing? Obviously, it's a thing that's real that you have to deal with. What are some of the best ways you approach that?
I mean, I think it's a great thing. The industry needs to be pushed and certainly pushed in the direction of authenticity. So when you think about people's experience with disease, it is inherently uncomfortable. And yet historically, as an industry, we have pretended that it's not. You see the patient running through a field of daisies with the perfect sunlight, peeking over their shoulder. And that's not the reality of how people live with disease. And so I think that the way that Americans see pharma companies really pushes us to think about how do we connect in more meaningful and authentic ways. One of the survey stats that was incredible and also slightly frightening was that 58% of Americans say that how a pharma company communicates with them is just as important as how effective their treatment is. So when you think about that, communications is really profound. And so we have to be creative. We have to recognize that our competitive set is fundamentally different. And when we're thinking about communications, you think about social media and getting someone's attention in the feed, your content has to be just as compelling as that of these lifestyle brands. It's really raised the bar for the industry.
Based on this, I'm canceling my 2 o'clock appointment to run through a field of daisies with the sun shining over my back. But do the findings you talk about, does that make people more confident about challenging their doctor?
Yeah, 100%. There's quite a bit of data that says that patients are very comfortable challenging their physician, turning down a recommended treatment and demanding something else. And when you think about why, it's that, largely out of necessity, patients are smarter and more engaged than ever before. There was some really interesting Gen Z data that we found that 59% of Gen Z respondents have read clinical trial data in the last 12 months. And then likewise, 56% say they've read a medical journal. I mean, that is, unprecedented, to use the U word of 2020. And I think that, they had to, right? COVID pushed every person in the world to care about health in a different way, in the way that if you're a patient and you're diagnosed with a disease, you go out and seek that information, you get smart. Now every American has done that. And so, you even just think about the vernacular of Americans. Everybody knows what efficacy means now. That's sort of dinner table talk. And that was never the case before, right? I think also when you think about BIPOC Americans in particular, and there's some interesting data around BIPOC population.
And that's Black, Indigenous, people of color. People aren't familiar with the acronym.
Correct. COVID not only forced them to be more engaged in the same way it did all Americans, but it also brought up a lot of distrust of the past, right? So if you hadn't heard of the Tuskegee experiment before 2020, right, you certainly did by 2020, midway through the year. And so again, patients had to be smarter and more informed, and they certainly went out and started seeking information in ways we've never seen.
Yeah, now you're talking sort of about two groups. Clearly, the groups that are reading medical journals, studies are pretty informed, and even the ones that follow Tuskegee Institute and that information, are following the news and getting information. But even though on one hand it might seem like a good thing that people are reading medical studies, there's also more misinformation out there that can, create a conversation that can be challenging for the medical professional and for the patient's own good.
Yeah, I mean, 99% of HCPs that we surveyed said that they have a patient coming to them with misinformation every week. And it's a huge concern, and when you think about how people get their information, obviously data tells us that largely from social media, that's where we're seeing misinformation. But the biggest result of that is that the healthcare journey it doesn't start with the HCP anymore. It starts online, right? And that creates a tremendous opportunity for misinformation. So the whole physician-patient dynamic has evolved. You used to go to the doctor, and it's almost funny to say this now. You used to go and say, I have these symptoms, what's wrong with me? Now you go to the doctor and you say, I have these symptoms, I think I have this disease, and I'd like this treatment because I read that it has better efficacy and the side effects aren't as bad. And that is a fundamental shift that puts a lot of power in the hands of those distributing misinformation online.
Now, does that also put power and increase the importance of what and how communicators are sharing information on behalf of the companies they work with?
Yeah, I mean, it's an imperative now for communicators to correct that misinformation, or at least outpace it, right? You're never going to have the scale to be able to correct every piece of misinformation. We see that on through the news with various unnamed social media networks. But the role of communications in disseminating credible and authentic and scientifically validated information has never been more important. And there is a responsibility. Respondents of the survey said they want the pharma industry to help them to determine what is false and what is real. And so if you're in pharma communications, outpacing misinformation has to be a critical part of what you do.
So how do you go about doing that? I mean, disseminating it is one thing, and clearly that's, step one. But how do you make sure it takes hold? Is there new research that can show what's more effective in how you communicate and engage, and where people hear information from that might be more persuasive and could help counter a lot of the misinformation, which I think is driven by a profit motive, maybe by unscrupulous people as well?
I don't know that there's a firm answer to that, right? I think we're all looking for it. Again, it's, we were talking before about how do pharma companies communicate differently. You have to get your message out amidst a lot of noise, right? Not just misinformation, but the fact that you are competing with a different competitive set, that, every company in the world now is a health company to some degree. And so raising the bar of how we communicate is really important. It goes back to authenticity, transparency. I think the speed with which we communicate has to increase. I always go back to one of my favorite communications examples in the pharma industry. It's getting old, but in 2018, I don't know if you remember, Roseanne Barr went on a racist rant on Twitter, and she came out and blamed it on Ambien. And Sanofi, the maker of Ambien, could have very easily played from the usual communications playbook, which is issue a very lengthy press release that nobody reads and sounds very medical. And instead, by 10 o'clock the next morning, they had come out with a perfectly worded tweet that was written in human language that said, basically, while all medications have side effects, racism is not one of them. And that not only went crazy on social media, but media actually wrote about their response. And when you think about how pharma has to engage, it is faster, it's more authentically, it's more honestly in language that consumers are going to understand, that's going to resonate with them.
Yeah, and I think part of that'll be taking a realistic view of what they can't say. and what they need to say being more important, obviously doing it in a way that you're not hyping off label things, et cetera, and doing what you clearly can't do, but you do need to be out there competing. Any final thought you want to leave the audience with? Maybe trends in 2023? Is this going to get worse? Is it going to expand? Where do you see it going this year?
Look, I think it's safe to say that misinformation isn't going anywhere. But I also think that this trend of patient empowerment, of them driving their health decisions, has a lot of staying power as well. I say communications has never been more important. This is really the moment for health communicators to step up, to play an active role in helping to guide more informed, smarter decisions about people's health, helping to broker a better physician-patient relationship, because we're seeing that fractured a bit because of the environment in which we're living.
Really helpful, important information. Thanks so much for participating with us.
Thanks for having me, Doug.